extend that respect. All Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Today, I'm joining you from Yorta Yorta country on the banks of the Murray River at Moama. Christy is joining us from Dja Dja Wurrung country near Bendigo, and Roz is joining us from the Kulin Nation in Melbourne. In terms of a brief overview of today's agenda, as I mentioned, we'll have a brief intro to both who FRRR are, a bit about our history and what we do and the context of the Future Drought Fund in terms of our strategic work. And then we'll jump in and talk about the actual program itself, explain how the opportunity types are structured, its relationship to other key streams of the Future Drought Fund that are in the process of being implemented across Australia, talk about the key dates for the program and some tips for grant seekers. You will note that you've seen a pop-up on your screen that the session is being recorded this evening for public dissemination, and don't feel like you need to make notes madly throughout the session, because the recording, the slides and the FAQs will be shared after the session this evening. Oh, shit, computer always wants to run an update, doesn't it, when you're in the middle of a presentation? Just bear with me. Before we launch into the presentation tonight, we're really keen to understand how you heard about the session today. So in the background, I'm just going to hand over quickly to Christy, and she's going to run a quick Zoom poll for us all.
Good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us. As Nina mentioned, I am located on Dja Dja Wurrung country, and this evening we're just going to ask you how you heard about the session. And the poll is launched. All you need to do is tick which is applicable to you as to how you heard. Results are rolling in. Thank you, everyone.
This really helps us understand how best to communicate with community organisations and how you prefer to receive information. So we really appreciate your feedback. How are we going, Christy? Are they quick off the mark tonight?
Yeah, they're pretty quick. There's a couple of stragglers, but that's okay. We'll wind that one up. Thank you, everybody, for that. And the digital results are always good.
Lovely. Thanks, Christy.
Thank you.
Just a little bit about FRRR. Look, fundamentally, FRRR's core business is around connecting goodwill with good purpose for the vitality of remote, rural and regional Australia. We are a registered charity, and we're established back in 2000, so 20 years ago, just over 20 years ago now, with a unique funding model that links government, philanthropy and business to match community needs with identified priorities within local communities. We strongly believe that activation of ideas through grants builds into longer term capabilities, momentum and resilience, with a committed focus on remote and rural communities. We are very proud of the support into some of the smallest and most diverse and interesting corners of Australia, often where other funders are unable to reach. We see the fundamental foundations of success, both for local communities and for FRRR, is around supporting grassroots leadership and economic viability. We value on-the-ground connections and actively work to be a trusted partner in local communities. We support targeted, results-driven work. And while we have a national reach, we certainly understand the local lens in each community and understand that each community is unique in its own right. FRRR has a strong national resilience agenda that's led by the people and communities that we work with. We know that our ability to be a healthy, prosperous and equitable nation depends on the strength of our social capital, our ability to deliver services across large distance in hard to reach places, our ability to have resilient infrastructure and our ability to respond to these threats, both climatic and societal. We believe that it's important to recognise and work with the natural interdependence of systems rather than create solutions that are siloed or which have unintended consequences on other parts of our system. Through our three strategic focus areas, we invest in the power of people to drive prosperity through building equity, inclusion, opportunity and wellbeing, particularly relating to First Nations governed organisations. We also invest in place to support locational context by encouraging economic sustainability, building cultural vibrancy in small communities and remote areas, particularly around Western Australia and Northern Territory. And finally, we invest in disaster resilience and climate solutions by activating community resilience knowledge, building climate resilient community infrastructure and rebuilding capacity through the recovery cycle. And it's in this area of our strategic work that the networks to build drought resilience is strongly positioned. We have three ways that we work at FRRR, and I think historically we've always been known for our granting, but you know, the support that we provide to communities is much more than money. We certainly do deliver granting. Increasingly, we're working in the granting and development space, and that we're quite unique in that we can provide funds to any not-for-profit group regardless of their tax status. And this is not the case with all funders. Many grant makers require that applicants either have DGR status, when I say DGR, deductible gift recipient status, or are registered with the Australian Charities and Not-for-Profit Commission, ACNC. But we're not limited in that way, which is fantastic. Increasingly, we're also working in a developmental context over the longer term by supporting communities to strengthen their capacity and resilience through programs such as investing in Rural Communities Futures program and the Disaster Resilient Future Ready program throughout New South Wales and Victoria. So this is taking a granting plus community development approach over a longer term, often 3 to 5 years, and working in and of those places. Another of our functions is that we leverage and broker relationships through our fundraising capacity. We provide not-for-profit groups who don't have DGR status access to that special tax status to support their fundraising efforts. So effectively by partnering with FRRR, not-for-profits that don't have their own ability to fundraise in their own right, we can provide that ability to offer donors tax deductibility, which is very attractive depending on the type of donor that we're liaising with. We also deliver insights and learning to advocate on behalf of rural, regional and remote areas. And this is a really important part of our work, I guess, that silently happens in the background on behalf of communities. But we sit on many national committees, you know, policy reference groups, all of those types of things to represent the needs of rural Australia. So the things that we hear and see when we're chatting to you on the phone are incredibly important to really inform our view of what's actually happening in communities across Australia. So at a glance, and look, these are 2019-20 figures, and certainly we've been increasingly busy. But to give you a brief snapshot of the depth of the work that we do across Australia, during the 19-20 period, we delivered 874 grants worth around $15 million to regional, rural and remote communities across Australia. And so with the ongoing drought and floods and bushfires, 61% of our grants supported short and medium long-term disaster response, which includes recovery and preparedness. So it's within this context that the networks grant is an incredibly valuable opportunity for us to be commencing that sort of, I guess, forward-thinking process around what drought resilience means to communities. So today we'll be focusing on the grant making of FRRR and in particular the Future Drought Fund's networks to build drought resilience. But to give you an idea of the diversity of support that FRRR delivered just before we jump into the detail, the following diagram will give you a quick snapshot of our work. So do keep that in mind for future initiatives that you might be working with, or perhaps other community groups that you might be involved with. And you can see we sort of sort our work into those three strategic areas that I mentioned before. In particular, we've been working with drought impacted communities for around at least 10 years now. So are well versed in the needs of rainfall deficiency and the impact that has across Australia. So just a bit about the Networks to Build Drought Resilience program itself, and I will hand over to Christy in a little moment, but I'll give you some sort of bigger picture view, because I think it's always helpful to understand the context of where this funding has come from and what the purpose of it is. Really, we're seeing the Networks to Build Drought Resilience program as a new opportunity to work alongside regional communities to become more prepared for and resilient to the impacts of drought. It is part of the federal government's Future Drought Fund. That is a long-term investment fund that provides a sustainable source of funding to help farmers and communities be more prepared for and resilient to the impacts of drought. The inherent purpose of the fund is around enhancing public good by building drought resilience, and is a central part of the government's drought response, resilience and preparedness plan. Of note is that the Networks program is actually one of 8 national initiatives supported by the fund, and they're in varying stages of delivery across Australia. You might be aware of the Drought Resilience Leaders program. FRRR are working alongside ARLF, or the Australian Rural Leadership Foundation, to deliver this type of support, and Roz will pop a link in the chat if you're interested in knowing more about that. Sorry, jumping around my notes there. The Drought Resilience Research and Adoption Hubs have also just been announced across Australia with their hub and spoke model, and that will be really interesting to start to understand how that starts to have connection to what we're doing within networks. You will also, and some of you may be aware of the Natural Resource Management Drought Resilience Program grants, and so a round of those grants have gone out already. Just in context, so networks and NRM grants are the 2 sort of streams that are grant making focused. The key distinction, of course, is that NRM relates to environmental outcomes. The networks program, what we're talking about tonight, relates to the social outcomes of the plan. The 3 strategic priorities across the FDF programs, when I say FDF, Future Drought Fund, are economic, environmental and social resilience. Broadly, the program provides agriculture dependent communities across remote, rural and regional Australia, so importantly not urban, with the opportunity to access funds for a broad range of initiatives that directly and clearly benefit local communities to strengthen their resourcefulness, adaptability and capacity to thrive. The purpose of the Networks program is to build strong social connectedness, strengthen social capital and support transformative activities that enhance community level resilience to drought. And as I've previously mentioned, the Future Drought Fund is structured under these 3 key strategic priority areas: economic resilience for an innovative and profitable agricultural sector, environmental resilience for sustainable and improved functioning of agricultural landscapes, and thirdly, and this is where the Networks program is really neatly positioned, is within social resilience to build resourceful and adaptable communities. So you'll hear us talk a lot about social resilience tonight, and that's why that sort of firmly positions us. So the Drought Resilience Leaders, Australian Rural Leadership Foundation program, as well as the Networks to Build Drought Resilience, are the 2 key initiatives that sit under the social resilience pillar of the plan. The longer term outcomes that we're working towards under this social resilience outcome is stronger connectedness and greater social capital within communities, contributing to wellbeing and security, in addition to supporting communities to implement transformative activities that improve their resilience to drought. So broadly, through the project supported via these grants that we're talking about tonight, we want to see people and communities be more prepared for and resilient to the impacts of drought. We'll talk about some definitions later on in the presentation too, around what, when we say drought resilience, what do we mean by that? What I will do now is hand over to Christy to talk about the nuts and bolts of how the program works. So where the money's coming from and where it's going to, just to provide some snapshot of how it all works. Over to you, Christy.
Wonderful. Thank you, Nina. And thanks everybody for joining us online again. So if you're thinking about where is the money coming from and where is it going to, essentially it's a combination of corporate and private donors and the Australian government, as previously mentioned. So the corporate and private donors combination is $1.25 million, and the Australian government component is $3.375 million. So essentially that's $4.5 million invested in grassroots community organisations to activate approximately 96 community-led responses to build the drought resilience. So what that will be is 22 capacity building initiatives, 21 events, 21 training opportunities, and 32 small-scale infrastructure projects. The Networks program is a new opportunity for regional communities to become more prepared for and resilient to the impacts of drought. The program enables a community-led, locally driven response to drought resilience. Community organisations can apply for funds to undertake activities that relate to one or more opportunity types, such as building community capacity, building skills and community connectedness, enabling improving collaboration via networks, and the upgrading of small-scale community infrastructure. So the program enables the community-led, locally driven response with 4 opportunity types, which are the different categories of funding. Building community capacity, events that build community connection and build understanding of climate risks, enable improved collaboration via networks, and upgrade small-scale community infrastructure. So opportunity 1 that's presented is projects that strengthen the capacity, the capability and coordination of professional, social or community networks in agriculture-dependent communities to build drought resilience. In the criteria, community applicants must address how the proposed project will contribute to one or more of the following outcomes: increase social connection in local networks, increase community engagement, a shared sense of purpose and community belonging, increase of access, participation and diversity in network participation, and/or improving the coordination and collaboration between social networks, other community organisations and sectors in local communities. Opportunity 2 is events that facilitate professional, social and community connection to build understanding of risks posed by drought and climate change in agriculture-dependent communities throughout Australia. So the criteria that applicants must address is how the proposed project will contribute to one or more of the following outcomes: increase opportunities for diverse people and communities to participate in networking events, and the examples are field days, conferences, forums, summits and seminars. Build knowledge and understanding of the risks posed by drought and climate change. Contribute to building a positive community culture and provide people and communities with an opportunity to work collaboratively together to solve problems. Fostering higher rates of innovation in the local economy and agricultural sector, and/or improve regional branding and the recognition of local agri-food systems. The program's third opportunity type is training to improve the skills, understanding and capacity of community network members to participate in community risk management, planning and community-driven projects that build drought resilience. In this opportunity, applicants must address how the proposed project will contribute to either one or more of the following outcomes: increasing access to information and training to build drought resilience in their communities, build knowledge and understanding of the risks posed by drought and climate change, and or increase the role and profile of professional, social and community networks in regional drought resilience planning. And the fourth opportunity is small-scale community infrastructure projects to foster connectedness, improve wellbeing, and make community facilities resilient to the impacts of drought. To read the guidelines in detail and to see project ideas, you can visit our networks page, which Ros will pop in the chat. And there's some examples of the roughly community centre shed, the Golf Graziers Beef Up Showcase in Corumba in Queensland. And what was addressed there is improving new and existing meeting places so they can be used year-round to support community wellbeing, improve connectivity, increase knowledge sharing, and or the increasing and use of broad community usage of the facility. So the Future Drought Fund's tiers for the grants, there's 3 of them. The first tier is $10,000 to $20,000. The second tier is $20,000 to $50,000. And the third tier is $50,000 to $150,000. And we're aiming a targeted spread of projects across the funding tiers. A combination of 50 in the 20,000 group, 34 projects in the $50,000 group, and 12 projects in the $150,000 group, giving us 96 in total. And again, those activities and opportunities. Activity 1 is capacity building. Activity 2 is events, which there's 24. Activity 3 is for training, which there's 10. Activity 4 is for community infrastructure, and we're looking for 32 projects there in total across the rounds. So you might be thinking, how do I apply? So it's one application form for all of the tiers, and it's the same application process for all the tiers. It's also the same opening and closing dates for all the tiers. And your organisation may be applying for one or more opportunity types. So what we mean there is you might be looking at both an event and some infrastructure. And that's okay, you just need to list that. If you're unsuccessful in our round 1, then you can apply again for our round 2. The most important thing is the timely deadline. So applications do close at 5 p.m. and that's Australian Eastern Standard Time. So for round 1, we're closing on July 5th. If you do need help, we're always here. Our team are more than happy to speak to you, whether that's by phone or email, and to nurture you through the application process. The key program dates. So we're currently open, which is exciting. We're busy promoting and engaging with community groups like yourself at the moment. As I mentioned before, the timely applications will close on Monday, the 5th of July, and that's 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. So make sure you make a note of that if you are in the West or Middle States. Those announcements for those programs will be in October 21, and that's approximately 50 projects. The activity for those projects must be completed between the 25th of October and the 27th of June next year. I'm also busy doing all of that. We'll be looking for case studies and documentation so that we can further promote the program. And after round 1, we'll close off for a little bit and open for round 2. So round 2 will open on the 20th of September this year. We'll promote and engage. The timely deadline for that round will be Monday, the 1st of November. And again, 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on that day. We'll be announcing approximately 50 projects in that round, and those announcements are around February. The activity for those must take place between February 2022 and the 27th of June 2022. Of course, we'll be promoting all of this and making lots of case studies and documentation and getting our final reporting ready for our key partners.
Just a quick note to project applicants that unlike some of our other grants, your project reports will be due into us by the 19th of August, and that's quite a bit shorter than or compared to, say, Strengthening Rural Communities granting. So that's something to note. We did have a question about that in this morning's webinar.
Lovely, thank you, Nina. So just to go over some definitions. So drought resilience, the term for that is the ability to adapt, reorganise or transform in response to changing temperature, increasing variability and scarcity of rainfall, and change seasonality of rainfall for improved economic, environmental and social wellbeing. Agricultural dependent is communities referring to rural, regional and remote communities vulnerable to the impacts of drought. And essentially, if we're looking at the local government areas, that's RA2 to RA5. So if you do need help with locating the information for that, please connect so that you understand where your community fits there. And what does the term network mean? That's informal or established groups of people that meet to facilitate professional, social and community connection, resulting in improved community wellbeing over time. Now, if your project doesn't fit the criteria that I've just mentioned, at FRRR, we do have other programs available. FRRR's widest reaching program is the Strengthening Rural Communities program, or you may have been referred to it as SRC if you've worked with us before. And the Strengthening Rural Communities program is a 4 rounds per year program. It's a national program, and it's deliberately designed to be flexible in terms of the wide range of community projects that we can support. And as it says, anything including the kitchen sink, so as long as it has wide community benefit. And we particularly encourage applications from locally led and all volunteer-driven initiatives. We're also interested in locally led responses to the changing climate and supporting preparedness and recovery from natural disasters. Some examples in SRC, community infrastructure projects, such as a new ramp for a community hall or kitchen repaint, delivering community events, activities, programs and services, such as a festival or a one-day event, the purchase or hiring of equipment or materials, organisational capacity building, volunteer training, governance, training for your board, or even mental health first aid course. And projects can be broad spectrum. So, for example, heritage, arts and culture, tourism, mental health and environmental. And that's all outlined in our guidelines. And I'll hand back over to Nina, who will run through some tips for securing grant funding.
Thanks, Christy. So just before we open up for questions, we will just skate through a few tips and tricks that we'd like to remind people of to help them ensure their best success with their funding applications. And look, it's just simple things like using clear, simple language, avoiding technical jargon, spell out your acronyms. Don't assume that we know what you're on about, particularly if they're agricultural sector related. We work within the broader community sector, so do spell it out for us. That helps us build our understanding as well. Use facts, not opinions. We always like links to research or local reports that have been done. Just provide some evidence base to the need for your project. Assume that we don't know anything about your organisation, your project or your community. Sometimes that's quite tricky to just take a step back from a project that you're often really passionate about. But it helps sometimes to get someone that doesn't know anything about your project to have a read of your application before you submit it. They can provide you with some valuable insights around that. Always attach your quotes and your financials, and I know it sounds silly, but do make sure that your budget adds up. Be specific when answering the questions. The questions within the application form have been very clearly structured around the way in which we're evaluating the long-term outcomes of this funding program in relationship to the expectations of the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment, who we're working closely with to deliver this project. So do take particular note of the types of things that we're asking you in those questions. And also make it clear how you're going to use the requested funds. So often, and it's quite normal, that we would get an application for a project worth, say, $500,000, but you're actually applying to FRRR for, say, 30,000 of that total figure. Really spell it out to us that we will use FRRR funds to pay for just the solar panels, or the solar panels and the installation costs. And so make sure that what you're applying to us for absolutely matches against the criteria. If there's any query about this, about how to structure your application, as Christy said, jump on the phone or shoot us an email just to make sure that's really clear by the time it lands in your application form. And remember your support letters. And I know support letters are a bit tricky to gather sometimes, and they're often the same people in your community are being asked for support letters. But can I just say that we place an inordinately, really strong importance on those support letters. For us, we want to be really confident that there's broad community support of your project or initiative, and support letters help us have that confidence. And we also love knowing what organisations are out there in terms of regional Australia. So it's good to know who's out there doing interesting work. There's some quick tips about your eligibility and the guidelines. And look, do take the opportunity to have a very good read of the guidelines, and they are a bit lengthier than what we would ordinarily do at FRRR for our mainstream granting, but we have tried to set very clear expectations for this program, both in the number of projects that we can fund, but also the types of geographical spread and really what we're looking for. So do take the time to read those guidelines, particularly in regard to what we can't fund. But just in brief, applicant organisations must be not-for-profit. So you cannot exist for private or commercial gain. So unlike other streams of the Future Drought Fund, where providers are working with individual farmers and individual business owners, that is not the case in networks. This stream of the fund is about broad community benefit. So hence the prerequisite for not-for-profit community-based organisations. You must have an ABN or be incorporated, and you must offer clear public benefit and be for charitable purposes and address a clearly identified need in the community. And again, that's where the link to your support letters exists. Activity must take place in agricultural dependent communities. And by that, we mean communities that are located in rural, regional and remote communities that are vulnerable to the impacts of drought. And we know that that's pretty much every community in regional, rural and remote Australia. But in terms of how we actually pin that down, we look at your remoteness rating. So anywhere outside of what we call RA1, so RA1 urban areas, is eligible for the granting. We know sometimes, and we often get granting applications that are just on the boundaries of where it moves from that urban fringe into the regions. If you're one of those communities, drop us a line, give us a call. Happy to have a chat around, where your eligibility sits within that. Always happy to look at the specific nature of your individual project. For us, it's about understanding where the benefit of that project exists. So it's not necessarily sometimes where the organisation is placed, it's where it's the individuals and community organisations that benefit from that funding. So if the people that benefit from the funding are in a regional area, then we're happy to accommodate those types of requests. Oops. Sorry, just skipped a slide there. In terms of the things that we can't fund, we aren't able to support your ongoing core costs of your operations that are not related to the project. So your public liability, for instance, the annual cost of your public liability, wages, rent, electricity, and so forth. Just with regard to the wages, we are able to fund a portion of those wages that do relate to the project. So do have some flexibility there. If you're unsure about that, again, give us a call and we can help you structure that in your budget. We don't fund prizes, gifts, trophies or awards. We don't fund projects that have already occurred. We had a question this morning around what if there's been a pilot project and can we fund the iteration of that? The answer is yes, we can. There just needs to be a clear distinction between what the pilot project was, when that was completed, and what the next iteration of the project is. We do not fund sporting activity within these grants. And just a note of specificity around, we can support sporting organisations where they deliver broad community good to the community. And I know that probably sounds a bit Irish, but that's relating to our charitability status. So we don't fund sporting activity, but we know, particularly in rural and remote organisations, some sporting organisations undertake activities of social and broad community benefit that have actually got nothing to do with sport. In those instances, we can actually support that. So again, jump on the phone, drop us an email, and we can make sure that you're sitting comfortably within those criteria and help you work through better understanding what your unique situation might be. We don't fund projects outside of Australia, and we also don't fund you if you're a political party, a lobby group, promoting religious outcomes, or as just as standard old individuals. In terms of some quick tips to build your budget, use the template in your application. It is designed to be simple. With regard to your expenditure, consider all your costs for the whole project, including the less obvious costs such as freight and marketing. Do get quotes for your larger items or costs. And so anything sort of north of $500, we would expect a quote or at least some sort of accurate cost indication on a letterhead of a reputable local tradesman, depending on what it is that you're purchasing or acquiring for your project. It can't just be an email of indication from, a volunteer community member. Please don't make costs up. I know that might sound funny too. We do get a variety of documentation. So yes, the more accurate they can be, the better. If you don't have quotes, there is a space in the application to explain how you've arrived at your estimated costs. With regard to your income, your co-contribution refers to funds that we put towards your project by your own group and other partners. Particularly when your applications get to the Grants Advisory Committee basis in terms of their assessment process, co-contribution is really looked upon very favourably, both philosophically but also financially as well. So do, go that extra mile in trying to build some support for your community project, even if it is, sometimes even it's $100, sometimes it's just a token gesture that we support your project and we're on board. In-kind income refers to your services and labour provided voluntarily. We cost out volunteer contribution at $41 per hour, so do pop that in your project as well. It's a really important indication of the support and contribution that your organisation makes, even though that it's not a cash contribution. The FRRR website has also had a really good zhuzh up in the last 12 months. So if you haven't been onto the website already, do take the time to jump on there and have a look at the funding grant seeker resources. There's a whole range of templates and videos and a whole range of interesting things that can help you structure your project as well. So before we open it up to questions, I'm going to hand back to my trusty co-host, Christy, to quickly run an interactive poll just so we can get a bit of an idea of how we've gone tonight. Over to you, Christy.
Thanks again, Nina, and thank you everybody for staying with us tonight. So the first question in the poll that we are launching is, how confident are you in writing a grant application after this evening's session? These are coming in thick and fast. Thank you, everybody. Okay, that's great. There's lots of confidence in our group, which is fantastic. Okay, and we have another question. How likely are you to apply for a grant with FRRR? Thank you, everybody. Again, great results with everybody. The majority are looking to apply for an FRRR grant. And the final question is just in regards to our delivery tonight, and have you found our event satisfactory? Thank you, everybody, and thank you for your honesty. It's very kind of you. With the polling for that question is 100% satisfactory. So that's a very lovely way as we start to round out our evening tonight. I will flick back to Nina, who will continue the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Christy. So just before I open up for questions, if you're interested in more information, I would encourage you to jump online and subscribe to the FRRR monthly e-newsletter. We publish funding opportunities as they arise throughout the newsletter, but also fund the really fantastic projects that we support across rural and regional and remote Australia. And I don't know, I find these incredibly inspirational to have a look at, and they always incite really great ideas. So do have a look and subscribe to that. If you're interested in the broader streams of the Future Drought Fund, two things: have a look at the program logic diagram that Ros posted earlier throughout the presentation. That will really give you an understanding of how the three streams are structured. So I was talking to a grant seeker earlier this evening, and once I shown them a diagram, and I know I understand things if someone draws me a picture, that diagram is really helpful to understand the three streams of the Future Drought Fund. But you can actually jump online via that Have Your Say link, the Department of Ag, Water and Environment, and subscribe to updates. So it is a pretty busy space at the moment. They've certainly have been made a couple of announcements just in the recent weeks. And there's some announcements, I believe, on their way imminently. So if you subscribe to that link, that's a good way to stay in touch with the entire Future Drought Fund itself. And again, jump online to see our grant seeker resources there as well. In terms of, and just to revisit before we open up for questions, these are your key dates. Now, these dates have been taken from the guidelines, but we did have some questions around those earlier in today's presentation, so I've just popped them in there in terms of things to note down. But again, encourage you to go to the guidelines. That is your one-stop shop and your primary source of information is the guidelines in terms of how the program works. So as you're looking at that, I've just been having a look in the chat, and if you're happy to stay online for just a little while longer, I will skate through these questions, and where I can answer them, I will. Where I might need to follow up with you individually, happy to do that. As I mentioned earlier, we'll be publishing the frequently asked questions that we're receiving both through the morning sessions and today, and we'll distribute those along with the slides and the link to the recording as well. But I'm just looking in the chat function now. Nicholas Pyers had a query around, can organisations apply for the $50,000 stream to fund an entire project, but indicated they could do phase one of the project with, say, $15,000 funding? So look, we encourage you to give us a call. We can talk you through which stream is the most appropriate. You can see that there are different levels, different numbers of projects that we can fund under each of those categories or tiers, but we would expect you to prioritise that yourself. Remember that it's all about building social resilience. So think about, how does my project relate to building social resilience and the impact that drought has had on my community previously. So I hope that helps, Nicholas. If you're still a little unclear, drop us an email at futuredrought@frrr.org.au and Chrissy can talk you through the nuances of your particular application. For Sandy Dello, for opportunity 4, it says small scale infrastructure. Can that still come under tier 3 up to the larger amount? Yes, it can, but just be aware that we have quite a small number of 150,000 tier applications to support across Australia. From memory, Christy, I think we have a total of 12 across the entire program. And look, we because it is a new program, we're unsure of the demand. We're assuming it's going to be fairly competitive. So do take that into account in terms of what you apply for. But again, jump on the email and have a yarn to Christy about your project. We're always happy to chat about that. So I'm just scrolling through our chat function. Just bear with me. Can a small community group be auspiced by a group with an ABN and incorporated status? This is Vicky from the co-working space. G'day, Vicky. Yes, absolutely. They can be auspiced. So we call it a legal organisation. So do phone us to make sure that they're an appropriate type, in terms of when I say appropriate type, legal structure, before you apply. But yes, for really tiny grassroots organisations, and we do certainly work in that way and understand that you don't always have the legal structures necessary to manage funds on your own behalf. James Blanford, it says sporting activity. Does that mean the only rec reserve in our community can't be funded for irrigation? Again, think about how your project, so yes, we fund infrastructure. Yes, we can fund rec reserves if it relates to building social resilience. If it relates to the activities of sport, then no, we can't fund that. So James, I'd recommend, encourage you to drop us an email and we can talk you through that particular project example. Question from Jenny Turnbull. G'day, Jenny. Can a distributing cooperative be classed as a not-for-profit? Our disclosure statement says all profit will be put back into the project. That sounds like an interesting query. I'd prefer to take that offline just to make sure that we're giving you an accurate answer. Really, the distinction for us is broad community benefit, non-personal gain, and it's okay for organisations to make profits. It just can't be for personal profit of members. So it depends on the structure of your constitution. So we would again encourage you, Jenny, to chat with Christy offline about that, and we can have a look at your constitution and just to make sure that you're eligible. And it's a really great idea to do that before you move through the application process. Question from Victoria, are there any support letter templates? Sometimes it's hard for people to know what to write. So no, we don't have any templates for support letters, but just to give you a broad reassurance, we don't expect tomes of information. Often our support letters are only 1 or 2 paragraphs long, and that's enough for us to understand of where the community support sits within the community, and the organisation submitting the letter of support knows and understands what the project is about. So can I say, look, keep it simple. Short is fine. It sometimes can even be an email. If it's an official email on behalf of the organisation, that's okay too. So yes, don't be too stressed about needing them to be long and too fancy. Question from the Food Next Door Co-op. Can you include admin costs in the funds that you apply for? Yes, where it relates to the project or activity that you're undertaking. So not your total annual administration costs, but where it relates to the project itself. Yes, absolutely. A question from Kelly. Can you please give me some examples of where wages can be part funded by grants? We would probably take this question offline with you, Kelly, just to talk through your specific project idea. But we would support a portion of your wages that is required to undertake the activity itself. So depending on how long your project is, depending how extensive the hours are required to administer that, we can work with you to better understand and put an accurate figure in your budget around that. But it's certainly a good question. Just scrolling through. Question from Jane. Do activity 1 and activity 2 have the same finishing date? Yes, so round 1 and round 2, yes, they do have the same completion date, and that is by virtue of their contract that we have with the Department of Agriculture, Water and the Environment. Is there a hard copy of the application so that we can see? This is a question from Ellen Day. Is there a hard copy of the application so we can see what the overall application looks like? Or is it just complete as you go online version? So you'll see that when you press the apply now button, when you jump through onto from the page, you can actually download a PDF of the application. So it's not a Word document that you can fill in, but it does at least give you an indication of what the questions are. So you can start to make notes offline and start to prepare your application that way. So yes, we do provide that functionality just so we can help give you an understanding of what it's like. But for those of you who have applied for FRRR grants in the past, we have tried to keep this application as simple and as straightforward as possible. We have customised just 2 questions specific to this granting opportunity, but the rest of our structure is exactly the same as you might have experienced with previous applications. Question from Ellen Day. We have a great local motocross club which is bringing together families from across the Western region. Could this club apply for some building improvements? Potentially, Ellen, if it relates to building social connection in relationship to drought resilience. So that's a really important point, that it's not infrastructure for infrastructure's sake. We have other grant funding available for that. All of these projects must relate to, and you must tell us in your application form, how they build drought resilience and social connection in your communities longer term. So if you feel like you can answer those questions, then absolutely. If you're unsure about that, we chat to lots of people and we really value those conversations. We love hearing from you. So do give us a call and talk through your application, and people report to us that they find those conversations really helpful in understanding matching your ideas of what you have for community projects, as well as how that then sits comfortably alongside the criteria. Question from Tracy. Can you save the application as you go back and come back to it later? Yes, you can, but we do encourage people to, in case your computer times out, to actually fill in your application offline in a Word document, and then carry your information across. You know, I apply for volunteer grants not with FRRR, other organisations, in my own volunteer time, and it's deeply heartbreaking if you lose your work. So I would encourage you to type that offline and carry it across into your application. So I'm going to stop sharing now. Oh, how fantastic is that to see you all. Are there any other questions that any of you have for me? Thanks for your feedback, Food Next Door Co-op. It is good to have your questions answered straight away, isn't it, when they're burning? And we will be publishing an FAQ So questions that we've gathered from this morning's session and some of the queries that we're hearing when we chat to people as well. So we'll be publishing those, which are also handy as well. Thank you, Jackie, for attending this evening. Thanks, Tracy. Any other questions before we round out this evening?
Thank you. That was really valuable.
Thanks, Ellen.
Thank you from Woodner. That was useful.
Thank you, Eleanor.
Thank you from Cleve Manshed.
G'day, Don. How are you?
Good, thanks.
We, FRRR, have a range of community organisations across Australia that we've become quite familiar with, and Mensheds are some of those really valued organisations that we have supported over a number of years. So good to hear from you, Don, and good to hear from the Eyre Peninsula. I heart from the Eyre Peninsula, as I'm sure it's some of the best part of Australia. I just have a question in the chat from James Blandford. If your local sports club is the only social place in the community and the improvements, the rec reserve will improve drought resilience, surely that's acceptable. Yes, James, we do receive applications and have funded, I'm thinking about a gymkhana in far northern South Australia. We've funded some of their social events, so that's a really good example. Not necessarily drought resilience focused, but yeah, in regard to your rec reserve, it wouldn't be infrastructure for infrastructure's sake. So in terms of drought resilience, it needs to be about the social connection that investment in infrastructure will bring about. So that's something to keep in mind. James, I would encourage you to drop us an email and we can give you a really clear answer on that. Thanks, Dave. Good to hear from the centre of Queensland. Isn't that fantastic? Were you coming to us from right across Australia tonight? Great. So if there's no further questions, I'd just like to say thanks for your time tonight. It's fantastic to see you all. And do get in touch. We were always really interested to hear about what projects and initiatives, ideas that you have in your community. And this is a really exciting initiative and new form of support that we can deliver to regional communities across Australia. So yes, we look forward to hearing from you. And thanks for your message, Susie, and good to hear from the Glenelg Arts Council. Thank you all and have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Good night.
You're right to stop recording.